So the recording has started. Also, we would like for you to ask questions, be engaged. They will give you a lot of information, but please definitely ask questions because we want this to be an interactive evening. So without further ado, I will ask Prabjo to go ahead and introduce herself and begin.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining the meeting. As mentioned before, my name is Prabjot. I'm with the County of Fairfax, and I specifically work in the solid waste management program. And today I'm going to be doing a presentation on an introduction to composting. So this is not going to be a full in-depth sort of education on composting and everything it entails. This is just a way to get folks a little bit more comfortable with the idea of composting and what it exactly is, what the process is, and just to make it a little less daunting. Yeah, so let me just share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen okay. Let's see. So this is just a quick agenda on what we'll be discussing today. Again, a quick-ish sort of introduction, the composting basics, home composting options, backyard hot pile composting, worm composting. So 3 to 5 are like 3 major methods of composting, grass cycling / leaf cycling, and then the Q&A and ending thoughts. So before we start getting into that, one wonderful resource that I want to tell everybody about that I encourage that you tell other folks about that you know or other residents is that if you live in the county and you don't know what to do with something, you can go to this website here, the fairfaxcounty.gov/publicworks/recycling hash trash. That's too much of a mouthful. On numerous occasions, I've just Googled the words Fairfax County Waste Wizard or Fairfax County What Goes Where. This is a great tool at your fingertips just to figure out like what do I do with furniture or what can I do with electronic waste or where can I take my food scraps, all sorts of different household items and stuff that's a little bit more obscure. And on a monthly basis, staff are working to increase the different types of items that go into this database. So if there's ever suggestions or if there's something that you want to find out how to get rid of it, but it's not there, we're always welcome to suggestions on what those items are so we can go ahead and add them onto this database. So highly recommend this tool. I use it all the time, even as an employee of the county. Before we start delving into compost, which is more of the back end of dealing with food waste, I think it is very important to communicate to people that one thing you should do before that step is actually just reduce your food waste in general. It's really important to just reduce the source in the first place. To your right, you'll see like, or my right at least, is the EPA's wasted food scale. And the best and most efficient option is just to prevent food waste so you don't have to deal with the processing of it later. That's the most important thing that we can do. And that just means reducing how much food that you throw away in your home. And that can include strategies like meal planning a little bit more, or just like maybe meal planning some of your meals throughout the week as like a quick transition into that sort of inclusion into your lifestyle throughout the week. Remembering to use the edible parts of your food. So for like certain things like potatoes, you can keep the skins on or use them for other things. Like cilantro is another example. The stems of cilantro are actually have way more flavor than the actual leaves of cilantro do. So just reminding folks that you can use a lot of edible parts of different parts of produce. Learning the difference between sell by, use by, and best by. I know that's a lot out there. You probably didn't even know that like 2 out of the 3, right? But I think just learning what that means is really important. So you're not just preemptively chucking stuff out when you don't need to. Freezing or refrigerating leftovers with dates. So if you have something that maybe you don't want to eat for a while, just throwing a label on there, using a marker and chucking it in the freezer is a good idea. And lastly, donating. So if you have food that's maybe perishable like produce and it's in good condition but you find that you won't be able to use it soon, donating it to folks in need is a really good step to take. And a big reminder of how important this step is 30% of the county's waste stream is organics. So while that's a really large number and it might look unfortunate, 30% is actually a huge opportunity, is the way I look at it. So we have an opportunity as residents, as the county also to take 30% of whatever is in the waste stream out of it, which is like a really great opportunity for us all. So now to get into the basics of composting. So again, this is not going to be a full lesson on composting and the nitty-gritty details, but more so just a way to get familiar with what composting is. Composting ultimately is just the breaking down of organic matter by microorganisms. And at the end of the process of composting, of breaking down produce and all of these other materials, you end up with a really lovely crumbly soil amendment. So that's just like making your own fertilizer in a way that you can add to your indoor plants and to your outdoor plants. The ideal environment for these microorganisms that do all of the work in composting is warm, moist, and rich in oxygen. Again, composting isn't a stagnant sort of thing. It's a living process, and you're a part of that process, and you have a lot of inputs that you put into that process. So it's like a little experimental, but it's just remembering that it's a living process that you're taking care of when you're feeding those little microorganisms. There are a lot of benefits to composting. It improves the soil structure. So when you're creating that compost with produce that you have at home, or grass or leaves or twigs and other materials that are in your home or in your backyard, when you introduce that back into your soil or into your plants, that can greatly help provide nutrients back into those plants that you have, into your gardens and into your backyard gardens or raised beds. That might be far more nutritious than what you may get at the store. Another benefit is organics don't have to go into the landfill. So instead of having so many organics, which includes again produce, twigs, other materials that can break down, they don't have to go to the landfill. They can instead go back into the process of being in your backyard or into your gardens and into your plant life. Again, it's a huge opportunity for you to be a part of that process and then also be part of a solution. You save money on soil amendments, so you're not going out to Lowe's or another hardware store or another gardening store to constantly be buying soil amendments. I know that's been a benefit for me with composting. After just buying the bin was the only initial cost for myself. I'm able to use all of the compost that I've made and use it in my indoor plants and also in my raised beds in my backyard. And it also provides great nutrients for earthworms, soil insects, and a lot more. And we all know, or hopefully know, that all of these microorganisms, including earthworms, insects, pollinators, really benefit from having improved soil quality. So what goes into composting? So as I said before, composting is a living process with a lot going on into it on a microscopic sort of level. So things that go into it are organic matter. So the elements of the composting process are organic matter, like eggshells, leaves, twigs, mineral nutrients that are really important, like nitrogen, iron, potassium, carbon, calcium, and all of these other nutrients that are surrounding the soil and that also come from the organic matter. Water and oxygen are, of course, important too. And then the microorganisms that do all of the work, like worms and fungi and nematodes. Like the key ingredients that go into composting are, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, I believe, is the browns and then the greens. So you have a mixture of stuff that literally looks green and then looks brown, and they both introduce different types of nutrients into the composting process, oxygen and water. The key factors that you're kind of always messing with while you're creating this like ultimately very beneficial environment for the composting process is that ratio between those greens and browns, which again, I'll talk about in a moment. The temperature. So ideally, you don't want to be in sub-zero temperatures when you're composting. These materials will still break down. It will just take a very long time. The composting process will just take significantly longer. material size. So instead of just chucking in one huge watermelon that maybe went bad or an apple core, it might be best to chop it into smaller chunks, like rough chunks, or break it into smaller pieces. So there's more surface area for these little critters to eat the produce or whatever the organic matter is, to break it down. And then the last element or factor is mixing and aeration. That is quite literally just mixing your compost or your compost bin just to get air into it, because oxygen is a part of the process. So as I mentioned before, I was talking about greens and browns. So there's an ideal ratio between greens and browns, or carbon and nitrogen rich materials. So you want browns to be like 2/3 of your compost bin and 1/3 to be greens. And the way to look at this is kind of like when you're making a salad dressing. This is how I remember, is that you're supposed to have different portions of like oil to like an acid. So it's a similar sort of deal here, where you want 2/3 of it to be browns and 1/3 to be green. And that's just the way I remember myself, like what the proportions or ratios should be. So green materials would be maybe like the lettuce that's going bad in your fridge, or a salad kit that you bought that doesn't look so great and edible anymore. And the greens are important because they provide nitrogen into the composting process. And examples of these greens that you would have are the fruit and veggie scraps. So like a leftover apple core, a banana peel, avocado skins, carrot tops, strawberry green tops, coffee grounds, and paper filters. So if you have paper filters that are compostable, that goes in there. That can go in there. And coffee grounds are also great too. Eggshells that are crushed. You can put them in like larger chunks, but if you can crush them better, the smaller the better for the little microorganisms that are in there. Paper tea bags that don't have staples in them, because of course staples cannot be broken down. They're made of metal. But paper tea bags, and then grass clippings. So a way to remember this is stuff that's maybe more so filled with water. It still has moisture in it. So it's still going to be a little green. And then the other side of this is going to be the browns. So the browns are the dry things for the most part that you're putting in. So you have wet and dry, which is another way to think about it, is greens are wet and then browns are usually dry. And the browns are filled with carbon, and carbon is really important too. And an example of that would be dried leaves. So we're in the peak fall leaf season. So if you have fall leaves in your yard that you're collecting, you can put those in. Plant stalks and twigs, because those tend to be dry too. Shredded paper, as long as it's non-glossy. Shredded cardboard. So if you're getting Amazon packages or whatever else it is, and you're getting cardboard boxes, you can get those boxes and just make sure there's no tape, no labels, no wax, or any of that material on it, just ripping off the labels, and try to shred it into smaller chunks. They don't have to be super tiny. It can be small. It can be kind of hard with cardboard, but just ripping that into big chunks and throwing it in there, into your compost bin. And also untreated wood chips. One thing that you can do when you're composting, if you found that you don't actually have enough of some of these materials, is you can just buy hay. That's what I had to do, because I had too many greens and it was peak summer. There was not enough dry yet because we were going through all of these rainstorms. So I just went to a farm supply store and I just bought a bale of hay or straw that I just now keep kept close to my compost bin. When the compost bin is looking a little yucky or a little too moist, I just grab a handful and throw it in there. So that's a brown, and it helps balance out the environment. And the way that you can tell your compost is doing okay, because again, it's a living process, kind of like cooking or like having a pet or even just gardening, right? It's a living process, is that your compost at the end shouldn't really smell too bad, and it should be not too wet. So if you find that your compost is too wet, like mine was, I knew that that was just the immediate like visual signal that I need to start adding in browns into there. These now we'll talk about very quickly things that do not go into the compost bin, or at least your home compost bin. Plastic bags or wrappers, that's a little bit easier because it's plastic. Plastic does not biodegrade really anywhere, especially in like a backyard compost bin or in your backyard, right? Foil would be one. plastic coated cardboard. An example of that might be if you go to Dunkin' Donuts or another coffee retailer and you get a paper cup with your hot coffee or hot cocoa or whatever it is. You might think it's cardboard, but actually the inside of those cups is lined with a thin plastic or wax material for whatever reasons, and that is just unable to break down in the compost bin because again, it's plastic or wax based, or who knows what it's based out of, unless it specifically says it's compostable. Oil or grease, that's just like creates a really gross environment for those microorganisms. There might be a more eloquent way to say that, but it just makes it a little yucky. It's kind of just doesn't create the optimal environment, even though oil or grease, particularly cooking oils, might be organic. Styrofoam, of course, doesn't break down. An interesting one is citrus. So while you can put in apple peels, banana peels, potato skins, those are great. In your home composting bin, citrus peels actually don't work. For the reason that maybe citrus is a great like household cleaner is because it's acidic, and a lot of the little microorganisms in the compost system or your compost bin can get killed off by the oil in the citrus. So maybe you can reuse the citrus peels for making it cleaner, a home cleaner. I know some people do that, but definitely doesn't go in the compost bin. Invasive species. So as I said before, if you have dry leaves, plant stalks, and twigs on your yard that you want to compost, that's great. But if you have something invasive, you don't want to put that in your compost bin. And the reason is pretty straightforward is, say you just got rid of a bunch of invasive bamboo on your yard, and maybe some of that ended up in your compost bin. When the compost process is done and you put that soil amendment back on your plants, you just introduced the thing that you were trying to get rid of that was probably expensive, hard process, just back into your yard. So you just undid all of that work. So just being careful, just you don't want to reintroduce invasive species back into your gardens or into your home plants. Animal or human waste, of course, that's organic, but it's unsanitary, can carry zoonotical diseases and all of these other things. That's pretty straightforward. There's a huge yuck factor to it, and that's accurate for a reason. You don't want to put that in there. Dairy, you don't want to have milk or butter products like that in there, or yogurt, and then also meat. And I believe that also includes bones, like chicken bones. So now we're going to talk about the three main types of composting. So there's hot pile composting, there's vermicomposting, which is worm composting, and then grass cycling / leaf cycling. Each of these have their own pros and cons to them. Some work better in other environments, while others maybe fare better in different environments. So, you know, it depends on your home size and all of these other sort of factors in the space that you have. So a backyard hot pile composting, this is what I personally do because I have the space for it, the proper space. So in hot pile composting, the microorganisms and bacteria do all of the work. The hot temperatures create an optimal environment for breaking down the organics, so you can get like really good compost within 3 months of that breaking down. In that graphic, you're going to see 5 different types of composting systems. There's the 3-bin system, which you just literally have 3 wooden boxes right next to each other. And in the first one is where you put in your very fresh produce, like the stuff you just brought out from your kitchen. Stage 2 is like the in-between composting process where it's breaking down, but it's not quite ready to use yet in your plants, but it's not like you can't see whole pieces of greens in there. And stage 3 is when you have the usable compost, which is this really dark soil, crumbly, like soil amendment. You have a trench system. Like I know a gentleman that had owned his home for decades and built like a literal trench in his backyard. That became a compost system. He was just able to dedicate time and space to this, where you just dig a hole and you just add organics into it and it breaks down over time. Not everybody has access to that, and not everybody wants to, you know, have a major sort of trench or hole in their backyard, understandably. The other system is a plastic bin, which you can purchase online or at a retailer, a wood bin, and then a tumbler. The one I use is a tumbler because it is the most easy space wise. It's easy to move, and the some of the portions of composting are a lot easier. So with the tumbler, there's a bar on the side where you can just move it like this, and it tumbles the materials inside, and it pushes and forces air into the compost. Um, that seems to be the easiest for me, but again, there's 4 other methods that can work for different reasons, for different space that you have. I just prefer the tumbler. Um, yeah, and as I mentioned before, you can purchase or DIY most of these systems. So some will DIY the 3-bin system, especially if you're handy or if you have access to the right tools. You can create a 3-bin system in your backyard or a wood bin. Some folks will buy plastic large bins from a store and then jerry rig those a little bit using like DIY online tutorials on creating those into compost bins. So again, there's a lot of different options. If maybe you tried one, it didn't work for you, you can move to another. Again, I like tumblers because they're a little bit easier if you have issues maybe with your joints or other accessibility issues. One of the issues that I found with the trench or the 3-bin system is when you have to add air into the compost, what gets really hard is you have to use a shovel, but anybody who's used a shovel knows that's a lot of upper body work, a lot of standing, and a lot of like arm usage. So that physically might not be accessible for folks, but the tumbler seems to be the easiest options for people like myself who can't be just using their upper body all the time to be stirring around a lot of organics. Vermicomposting is straightforward. The worms do the work. So in the previous one, there's really no worms that you're intentionally introducing. It's just these bacteria and fungi that naturally find themselves in the environment that go into your compost bin as a part of the organic process because there's food there for them. It's a food source. With vermicomposting or worm composting, you're intentionally adding worms into your compost bin, and the setup looks a little bit different. One thing that was asked to me actually by Katie, my boss who's attending this meeting, is do you have to keep buying worms for a worm compost bin? You don't. They actually replenish themselves according to the scale of how big their container is. So the worms are usually just a one-time buy, which is great. Vermicomposting is actually really optimal for small spaces or limited spaces where you don't have a backyard or even a balcony, like apartments, condos, and even offices. I've been in an office before where somebody had a compost bin with like hundreds of worms. I had no clue that it was there for like 6 months, but it turns out there was a whole compost bin with hundreds of worms just doing all of this work. I never smelled it. I could never tell anything was there until somebody showed me that there was a worm composting bin there. One thing to know about this is that the regular sort of earthworm is not the worm that does the work in these compost bins. It's the red wiggler worm, which is, I believe, a worm that is native to Europe. It's not native to the United States. It's not a native species, but they're not necessarily as, what's the word, invasive as other species are. And you can buy these online also, which is pretty cool. Worm composting is great. These little worms, I think a pound of worms can eat, up to 65 pounds of food scraps in less than 3 months. So they can go through food pretty fast. If you're going to do worm composting, it's recommended, as I mentioned before, the smaller the pieces of whatever you're putting in there, the better. Just because then the worms have a lot more surface area where they can be like munching on these like organics, because they're literally, that's how this composting process works, is the worms are eating the food, the organic matter that's in there. What you'll see too in this graphic is this blue bin. So what's cool about worm composting is you can DIY it relatively easily, or you can also purchase a worm composting system. So I've attended a worm composting workshop where you just get where people that attended the workshop were handed 2 plastic bins, like those huge like garage or basement storage bins that you use for like your non-seasonal clothing and all of that stuff. In the top box, you drill a bunch of holes, and in the bottom one, you don't drill any holes. in the top bin where the holes are, you have layers of bedding and netting and the worms, and that's where your compost, like your organic materials, like your apple core that you don't want to eat, that you throw in there, it goes in the top, and all of the compost and leachate, which is something that comes from or like I would call it compost juice, which is also very nutritious for plants, falls into, and that's the stuff that you can also put in your plants. Again, worm composting is really great if you have limited space, if you're in a maybe a retirement home, if you're renting, if you're in like a one-bedroom apartment, if you're in a high rise, and again in an office. People will not know that it's there unless there's something very wrong with it. The optimal environment for a worm composting bin is not cold, that you want it relatively a little, at least room temperature for the most part. You don't want to freeze them off. The darker, the better, I believe. But it's okay. It's best for the compost bin to stay dark, but you don't want it's okay to have light around it because you want the worms to stay in the dark bin. Unfortunately, and entertainingly enough, worms can escape, but the only way that they will escape is if they're just not being fed enough. Um, so yeah, there's worm composting. And then lastly, grass cycling or leaf cycling. So this is a process that the county is trying to encourage residents to do that have the space. Grass cycling or leaf cycling is quite literally the process of just leaving leaves, fall leaves, or your grass that you mow on your yard. You can move it to a less visible sort of location, but you just leave these items on your yard, and slowly over time they will break down, and the nutrients from the leaves or from the grass will seep back into your soil, creating, like, again, very healthy soil, helping with soil erosion, putting those nutrients back in there. One of the other benefits also of having doing leaf cycling or grass cycling is that a lot of insects really benefit from having piles of leaves. They live in those little things. So an example would be lightning bugs. Lightning bugs love fall leaves and like piles of grass and leaves. It's very optimal for them. And that way in the summer, you get to enjoy like a very whimsical, sort of fun experience for yourself or your kids or your grandkids, but also, yes, just an optimal environment and home for them, especially if you care about the environment and maintaining the integrity of the environment. That's just like one small thing you can do. Some of the benefits of this is, again, you're not spending the time bagging leaves or bagging the grass. You're not spending time taking it to wherever it needs to go to be disposed of, or you're not having to pay somebody that additional labor or work of picking it up and taking it somewhere to dispose of it. You can reduce injuries if you're doing this yourself. If you find yourself mowing your own lawn or raking your own leaves, you can reduce injuries because you're not doing all of this lifting work. And again, it allows worms and other critters to do their job naturally, while really improving your soil quality. If you'd like to learn more about leaf cycling or grass cycling, you can go to this link that's here. And again, this presentation will be sent to everybody, so you don't have to race to write down all of these links on here. So this will be sent out. And you can just learn more about this process and maybe any other additional details that go into there. Like one quick one is with grass cycling, you might have to have a mower that has an option of mulching, or you might have to have machinery that does mulching. So there's just a few additional details that go into that if you're interested, or if you're interested in sharing with other people. Say all of this has been educational for you, but you're like, you know what, I don't want to compost because this is just an additional backyard project I have to do, or I don't have the space and I don't have the time to be taking care of worms and all of these other little critters in your backyard. Understandable. The county just wants to provide some like background on like what you can do. Say none of that sounds appealing, you just don't want to try it, you have too many other projects going on. We recommend that if none of those options work, you can always drop off your food scraps either at a local farmers market in the county of Fairfax, or you can also take it to the I-95 landfill that's located in Lorton, or you can take it to the 66 transfer station, which is in Fairfax. So you can usually, I know the season is ending in December for farmers markets, but for about half of the year, residents can take their food scraps to the local farmers market. There's this graphic right here that shows like what can and can't go in there. So if you find yourself already going to the farmers market, you can just take your bin, your kitchen pail with you. And just drop off those items at this little collection center that's mobile and usually there. And again, that includes nuts, bread, cereals, even meats and seafood, cheese and dairy. So I know earlier I'd said in your home compost bin, you can't be putting meat and dairy in there. The difference between the home composting and the composting that these materials, or like the facility this is taken to, is those facilities that the county owns or other partners might own, is that when these food scraps are taken, including like the meat and the cheese and dairy, they're not home composting bin. They're like multi-million-dollar composting facilities where the environment is just created where those things can be broken down in like a sanitary sort of way. And they might be also used for different purposes, like maybe not food, but maybe for construction, roadside projects, and all of these other things. So if you find that you still want to get rid of like meat and seafood and bones and cheese and dairy, you can do that through the food scraps drop off program again. I believe mid-December is when the last farmers market is going to be hosted. After that's over, again, you can go to the 95 complex if you find yourself dropping off other items, or the 66 transfer station. They're both open 7 days a week. One of the recommendations is try to use something that's reusable, like a kitchen pail. You can go online and just search compostable kitchen pail or compost pail for like your home. And it's just usually a small kitchen box that's maybe about like 1 foot by like 6 inches or a little bit larger. You can also use a bucket that has a top that closes on it, or something else just to make it easier and less messy for yourself. Yeah, that's it there. And then again, you can learn more at that link that will be provided to you later on. Say you don't even want to do that because that's just too much work and you're willing to pay for curbside services. You do have the option of subscribing to a curbside collection service. So we have a list here of the food compost, like food waste collection companies. So these are companies that are permitted in the county of Fairfax to provide collection services for food waste. Compost Crew, Future Acres, Urban Farming, Monster Organics, Natural Upcycling, Veterans Compost DC, and the Purple Pilot Program Wormworks. Again, this link will be provided if you're interested in doing this. And what would be a great option about this is that you can also get maybe large enough bins. I'm not completely sure, but you can ask these companies, these haulers, about having large enough bins to actually take some of your yard waste too. So if you don't want to keep grass and leaves on your property or twigs, I believe that if you pay for the service, depending on what they provide, you can get rid of your materials that way, and you don't have to like have somebody pick it up and take it somewhere else. And before questions, you can be notified of upcoming workshops. Again, I had mentioned that worm composting workshop that I attended with one of our partners, our county partners, where 40 residents had showed up and they were given the materials and the tools to create their own compost bin, their worm compost bin, along with the worms. So everybody went home that day with a home composting bin, worm composting bin, along with the worms. So they're able to go home and get started on that. So I'd recommend following up on this link so you can find out if there's any upcoming workshops. And now for questions. And again, if I can't get to you all of your answers right now, I can also provide responses when I send that PowerPoint out.
Thank you, Prabjot. That's what we're going to do in the interest of time. Steve, I see you have your hand up. If you can put your question in the chat, and then Prabjot, if you can also put your email in the chat.
Yeah, it's on the screen now. So the trash mail email right there. So if you want to email, you can, and you can also call that number and we'll reach back out to you with any questions that you have.
So for this presentation though, can you put your email in?
Yeah, I'll type it into the chat.
Yeah, so
yeah.
people can email you or type their question in the chat.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for this wonderful and in-depth presentation. I learned so much that I had no idea about. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure. And I just dropped my email in the chat, so I'll try to respond at my earliest convenience to get you the information that you need. And again, we'll be sending out the presentation, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to write these links down.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And so now we're going to move to Allison. Allison, if you could introduce yourself, let everybody know who you are and what your presentation is going to be about. And then Steve, I see your hand still up, but you can just go ahead and put your question in the chat now if you so desire.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us. My name's Allison Homer. I'm a senior climate planner for the Fairfax County Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination and the program manager for Resilient Fairfax. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I have 3 rowdy boys in the background, so if you hear any of their noise, please let me know and I'll tell them to be quiet, and I apologize. Before we dive in, let's do a show of virtual hands. How many of you have heard of our office, the Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination? Don't feel bad if you haven't, just trying to get a sense of background information that might be helpful to folks. Let's see. All right, it looks like it's new to most people. Oh, Mike. Yes, Mike. Good to see you. So the environment is a very broad subject that relates to many different topics. We commonly think of things like trees and trash and composting that was just discussed, but environmental topics also include things like environmental disasters and flood risk reduction and water pollution reduction and transportation and energy. And much, much more. So because there are so many topics involved, there are also many departments involved. So there are over 25 agencies that touch environmental and climate related topics in one way or another. However, each agency is focused on their own work, which can make it challenging to connect the dots and ensure policies and projects are in alignment. So that's where our office comes in. So we're housed within the Office of County Executive, which gives us the ability to coordinate across all departments. And we take the coordination part of our name very seriously. We do a lot of interagency coordination and leadership on environmental and climate related projects across the spectrum. More specifically, our office handles environmental administration and policy, such as environmental legislation and grants and awards. We also have staff who focus on making county government buildings greener, such as energy efficiency upgrades and solar panel installations. We lead community-facing environmental programs like Green Business Partners and HomeWise. We lead the county's climate planning and implementation, including both emissions reduction and resilience. And then all of our staff conduct environmental coordination and communications across county entities and nonprofits, other levels of government, utilities, the general public, and more. At the beginning of our presentations, we like to go over a few key definitions so that no one feels lost. Does anyone want to take a stab at the difference between weather and climate? Any takers? All right, so climate is often confused with weather, but there's a key difference. Weather refers to the conditions that we experience day to day, such as daily high and low temperatures, individual storms, or heat waves. I always say that weather is like a mood, it changes all the time. And if weather is like a mood, climate is like a personality. So ideally, it would be relatively stable over time. So climate by definition refers to the overarching norms for your area based on conditions that have been averaged over 20 years or longer. It has to be 20 years plus, usually 30 years plus. So those norms are how we're able to say that some places have a temperate climate or a polar climate or a tropical climate. So if you imagine plotting the average weather conditions year by year on a chart that spans at least 20 years, like that chart that's in the bottom center, that full trend line is climate. So if it was stable, you would expect a flat line rather than a tilted line. Another way to visualize this is as a map of climate zones shown on the bottom right of this slide. So for most of Fairfax County history, our climate was relatively stable. However, in recent decades, that trend line has seen a measurable tilt upwards. And when that whole trend line or whole climate zone shifts, we're more likely to see conditions that weren't historically normal for our area. So to summarize, an individual weather event or an individual heat day is not climate, but there is however, as the average climate trend line shifts over time, we are more and more likely to see weather that would have previously been called extreme. So I have a 1 minute game. I'm trying to keep you guys awake to sort the differences between weather and climate. So the conditions this week, is that weather or climate?
I'm gonna say weather.
Great job. And then what about conditions over time?
Anyone can unmute themselves and answer the question.
Climate.
Thank you, Colleen. What if someone says the average annual temperatures have risen 4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1962 in Fairfax County? Is that weather or climate?
That's climate.
Great job. Due to the high heat index today, the county has activated its heat plan.
Weather.
Good job. And then which one is like a mood that changes all the time?
Weather.
Great. And then climate is like a personality. Which one is what you expect based on long-term norms?
Climate?
Yep. And then which one is what you get day to day? That one is weather. Good job, guys. So in Fairfax County, the climate has gotten measurably warmer, wetter, weirder. There are other hazards as well, such as drought, but in the long term, these are the main changes so far. So these charts show how temperatures, flash floods, and severe storms have changed over time in our county as tracked at the Dulles Airport Weather Station. These trends are projected to continue and to accelerate. And in case anyone would like a 30-second earth science refresher on how that all works, again, I'm trying to keep you all awake. Here's a fun animated slide that makes it as simple as possible. So you have the Earth and you have the Earth's atmosphere. The sun sends solar radiation to the Earth as light, and then some of that energy radiates back out into space as heat. And then on our planet, we have naturally occurring gases that are called greenhouse gases because they work like the ceiling and the walls of a greenhouse. So if you've ever been inside a greenhouse in the winter, you know that they're warm even if it's cold outside because sunlight can come in through the glass as light, but then when the energy converts from light to heat, it can't get back out. So similarly, greenhouse gases trap some of the sun's heat over our whole planet. And so a small amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is normal and necessary for life on Earth. The problem is that there has been an exponential increase in the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere due to exponential increases in emissions from our cars, our power plants, our factories, agriculture, and more. So with higher concentrations, there's too much heat that's trapped in our atmosphere, which alters our very delicate global climatic patterns of heat and moisture and exacerbates natural disaster-related vulnerabilities. And then the reason trees and natural resources come up when we're talking about this is because you might remember from science class that trees breathe in carbon dioxide rather than oxygen, so they help to absorb some of our emissions. So the good news is that we are working to address both the cause and the effects of climate change. On the cause side, which is this blue category over here, we're doing our part in the global group project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that means reducing emissions from our transportation, our energy use, et cetera. Emissions have to be reduced on a global scale for any difference to be made, but we're one of the largest counties in the United States, so we can do our part and we can serve as leaders for others to follow. So within that emissions reduction bucket, we have two plans. CCAP is the one that applies to the whole population. And then the operational energy strategy is for emissions reduction in county government buildings specifically. And then on the effects side, that orange category, that's what I lead. So that is called Resilient Fairfax, and that's for adapting and boosting our resilience to the effects of climate change that we experience here locally, such as increasingly severe storms and flooding and extreme heat. So Resilient Fairfax, that orange one, is what we're focused on today. All right, so let's zoom into Resilient Fairfax specifically. The Resilient Fairfax planning process included 5 major steps. Throughout these steps, we held over 200 engagement meetings. And first, we assessed how exactly the climate is changing for Fairfax County specifically, because of variation based on where you're located. You know, the hazards that happen in California are totally different from what we have here. So that first item, the climate projections report, details what exactly has changed for us so far and what will it look like for us in the upcoming decades. And then the next step, once we knew about what the climate will look like for us, the second step was to understand where we're vulnerable to those changes. So we analyzed our infrastructure, our public services, our populations, and how they're exposed and sensitive and less able to adapt to those hazards. So that's all in the climate vulnerability and risk assessment. And then we also assessed how we're currently doing in terms of resilience and where we have opportunities for improvement. And then we drafted strategies, so what we're going to do about it, and then an implementation roadmap, which is how we're going to implement those strategies. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too long on these details, so I'll just quickly run through a few highlights, and I'm happy to answer questions later for anyone who's interested. But in the warmer category, the biggest difference has been hot nights. So nights don't cool down as much as they used to. You can see in that top graph on the right how the number of hot nights per year has drastically increased since the 60s. And then that urban heat island map on the bottom right, that is the real land surface temperatures of Fairfax County. So those bright red areas, those are areas that have a lot of asphalt and parking lots and dense buildings and not a lot of green space. So they're physically a lot hotter than other areas. So while extreme heat affects all of us, it affects the people who live in those hot areas even more. In the wetter category, the biggest difference is that when it does rain, it rains a lot harder than it used to. So our total precipitation over the course of a whole year hasn't changed that much, but the intensity of that rain has changed. Rather than having a gentle rain over a period of a few days, there's a sudden downpour and then nothing, and then a sudden downpour. And that can cause flooding if our stormwater systems are not designed to handle that volume of water all at once. Also in the wetter category, we've seen a rise in the Potomac River by 1.13 feet or 13 inches since 1924. And it's projected to rise an additional 1 to 3 feet by 2050. And that's because the Potomac River is connected to the ocean. So when the sea rises, the Potomac River also rises. So we track all of that with a tide gauge that's been running since the 1920s. More intense climate hazards mean that first in the weirder category, we have storm and wind events that are more frequent and intense and less predictable than they used to be, as I'm sure you all have witnessed. So when we have these climate hazards that are exacerbated or more intense than they used to be, that means that our existing vulnerabilities are also exacerbated. We have a 300-page vulnerability and risk assessment for anyone who's really interested, but in summary, we need to strengthen the resilience of our infrastructure, our public services, our natural resources, and our residents. In addition to mapping the climate hazards themselves, we also consider which neighborhoods may need the most help. So I wanted to show just one example of what that looks like. So for heat on the left-hand side, the heat exposure index shows us which areas are physically hotter than the other areas. That's what I was showing you earlier. And then in the middle, heat sensitivity index shows us which areas have large numbers of people who are sensitive to heat. They might have pre-existing health conditions or advanced age or disability, or they can't afford air conditioning. Any number of factors. Those neighborhoods are highlighted in dark red in the middle map. And then when you overlay those two, you get the heat vulnerability index on the right-hand side. So those are the areas that are both physically hotter and they have residents that may be more vulnerable. So those red areas on the right-hand side, that's where we prioritize things like cooling centers and tree plantings and cooling services outreach for people who can't afford air conditioning, that sort of thing. So to boost our resilience to these vulnerabilities, there are 48 strategies in the Resilient Fairfax plan. Those strategies don't all fit on one slide, so they are categorized into 4 major pillars, which are shown here. The one that's most relevant to you all is the purple pillar, so climate-ready communities. That includes promotion of county services and aid and public education and outreach and updates to our county codes to encourage more climate-ready development. If any of your faith communities worship in buildings, you also might be interested in the orange pillar, which is resilient infrastructure and buildings. So that's physical upgrades to buildings to make sure they can better withstand things like flooding and power outages. All right, so I have another game here to talk about some specific examples of what you can do to boost your resilience. This is a game that we bring to community events. In real life, it's a very large magnet board that people can put little magnets on. So the house on the left with the blue door is more resilient to things like flooding and heat and storms. And the house on the right that has, a flooded backyard is less resilient. Does anyone want to try to spot any differences between the two homes?
You can put it in the chat also, but
Well, one house is white and the other is dark.
Yeah, good job. So the house on the left has cool roofs and cool walls. So literally, sometimes if you have lighter colored paint on your house, it stays cooler during extreme heat, and it can also save you on your air conditioning bill because it doesn't get as hot.
Mike Reynolds put in the chat vegetation. I'm trying to pull up the chat now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so more green space, more trees. Trees absorb a lot of storm water. As long as they're not, hazardous trees that are close to your house, they can, be very beneficial. They can keep your house cool and they can absorb a lot of storm water. Yeah, solar panels. If you have your solar connected to battery backup, they can provide backup power in case of emergency.
You got shade on
Mhm.
one and a lot of grass on the other.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I saw in the chat too, impervious cover. Yeah, so the house that's on the right has a lot of their yard paved over. And so then when it rains, the water has nowhere to go. It can't sink into the ground. And so it just floods because it can't sink through the asphalt. And then a couple of the trickier ones are
I have
that,
a rain barrel,
oh yeah, good job.
a rain
Um,
barrel, and I'm not sure what's next to it.
Yeah, a rain barrel. And then, yeah, sorry, I drew this in PowerPoint, so it's not ideal, but that's supposed to be an HVAC system that's elevated. So we've had some homes that people, if your HVAC is right on the ground and then floodwaters get to it, then it ruins your HVAC. So elevating your HVAC can be helpful.
You have an environmental swale in one.
Yeah, exactly. Man, you guys are experts. Yeah, there's a bioswale. And then one of the ones that is a little trickier for people to notice is that this house has a wall that's blocking the overland relief path. So if you've ever seen those paths that water takes when it rains, you want to make sure that those are not blocked by walls or sheds or fences, because if it's blocked, then the water again has nowhere to go. And so it'll just back up behind that wall or around that shed. And then they also have a basement window that is covered, whereas this house does not have the window covered, so the water can get into the basement. So good job, y'all. I wanted to go over a few examples of how faith communities in particular can help with resilience initiatives. Um, One thing that was really helpful this past summer, where faith communities really showed up for us in an amazing way, was with the Harmony Place Heat Relief Project. So there are certain neighborhoods in Fairfax County that don't have sufficient access to air conditioning. Harmony Place Mobile Home Park was one of those places. Um, so there were trailers that were over 100 degrees inside with kids living there. We had a quick collaboration between the county and nonprofits and places of worship. And there were places of worship that donated a ton of AC units to install in these homes, and we were able to install 31 AC units and other critical repairs. So if any of you all participated in those donations, thank you very much for that. Another thing that places of worship can do is they can participate in the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, or FMAP. That's not run by our department. It was started by Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, and it's now managed by Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, but we can direct you to the people that you need to be in contact with. But basically, this is a way to, if you're going to install some of those flood-proofing measures, like a floodgate or a basement window cover or utility cover to make your building more flood-proof, you can be partially reimbursed for that cost up to $5,000. And eligible entities include places of worship in Fairfax County. Another program that you all can participate in is the Conservation Assistance Program, or CAP. So this is another partial reimbursement program where you can be partially reimbursed for flood risk reduction techniques in yards, such as bioretention areas or infiltration trenches or rain gardens, or removal of hard pavement impervious cover. There's technical assistance for you as well, so you don't have to be an expert on how to do it. And there's another program called Energy Conservation Assistance Program that my colleague Neely will talk about shortly, so stay tuned for that. Another way that places of worship can be involved with Resilient Fairfax is by becoming a resilient building or a resilience hub. A resilient building is a building that is physically resilient to flooding, storms, heat, and power outages. So it has things like what we just ran through in that game with flood-proof windows and doors and backup generators and cool roofs. But it doesn't provide any public services. So it could be an office building. It could be, a building that has no public interaction at all. And then a resilience hub goes above and beyond a resilient building because it's not only physically resilient, but it also provides services and programs and trainings to help the surrounding communities become more resilient themselves. So a resilience hub would do things like connect residents to county services, like the programs that I just mentioned, provide a space for resilience-related trainings from staff, provide supplies, and more. One thing to flag is that resilience hubs are not the same as emergency shelters. So emergency shelters are already well established in the county and they follow strict Red Cross protocols. Resilience hubs are not trying to shelter people during emergencies. They're providing services day to day that help a community boost their resilience ahead of time. So if your place of worship is interested in becoming a resilient building or a resilience hub, we have a pilot resilient design checklist of 100 plus items for you to consider. And so you can please email us if you are interested. Another specific thing you can do is consider the type of trees you're planting. So we've had a lot of trees lost in Fairfax County due to severe storms. So many, in fact, that downed trees are the #1 reason for road closures in Fairfax County. Fun fact or not so fun fact. We have done a lot of research on trees that are more resilient to severe storms and flooding and heat. and also trees that can help us adapt to changing conditions by absorbing large amounts of storm water and reducing heat. Additionally, there are some tree species that are migrating out of Fairfax County as the hardiness zones shift. So you'll want to pick trees that can adapt to our latest hardiness zones. So all of that's to say, if you're looking for tree recommendations or if your place of worship is planting trees, please reach out to us and we can give you some tree recommendations. And all of that was done in collaboration with our partners at Urban Forestry and Fairfax County Park Authority. Finally, you all can help by ensuring that your congregations have access to these contacts. So this flyer has phone numbers and emails for a range of things that might be important for them. So flooding concerns and key safety lines, community aid and services, property and permitting help, and reporting environmental hazards. So if you would like a copy of this flyer to post in your place of worship, please let us know and we can send you a copy. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or in the interest of time, we can hand it off to Neely.
Yes, let's hand it off to Neely. And then if she's done in time, we can have questions, but if not, then Neely and Allison will also put their emails in the chat so you all can email them. And then Allison, will this PowerPoint be available with the links and everything afterwards?
Yes, yep, we can send a copy.
Okay, great. So now let's hear from Neely. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Neely, if you're talking, you probably are muted if you're
That has been a trend for me today. So I apologize.
No way.
Anyway, I greatly appreciate you all staying around for this third presentation. I'm here to talk about money. So glad you're all here, and hopefully that piqued your interest. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Environmental Energy Coordination and am currently the Program Manager for the Energy Conservation Assistance Program. Allison and I both work together, and the Energy Conservation Assistance Program falls into the blue boxes that Allison was talking about that are part of our climate plans and actions in Fairfax County. So this program has been set up to support members of our community to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to climate change and resulting in warmer, weirder, and wetter weather that climate that Allison spoke to. See, even I just got tripped up between weather and climate. All right, next slide. So the Energy Conservation Assistance Program provides financial assistance to improve the energy efficiency and resilience of our buildings. And I'll define resilience for this program a little bit differently than the support that the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program has. But when you improve the energy efficiency of your home through energy upgrades by changing light bulbs, installing a heat pump, putting more energy efficient, Energy Star rated appliances, windows, doors, insulation, you name it, you're reducing the emissions through those building operations that rely on more equipment that rely on fossil fuels to heat and heat our homes. And so by increasing the energy efficiency by better insulation, more energy efficient equipment, you're reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And there are many congregations and places of worship that have various green teams or missions to achieve net zero in terms of their building energy. that support those types of projects, and that is a great thing. But there are many co-benefits to being more energy efficient, and that's just saving money, right? You are reducing your energy use by being more energy efficient. So everyone, when you get that energy bill, utility bill in the mail every month, if you're more energy efficient, you're going to see those bills go down every month. But then there is also building health, as well. A well-ventilated, building that's well insulated. It's going to improve your indoor air quality. A drier and warmer building is also going to make it more comfortable for you to, live and work. So there are many ways in which you can improve the energy efficiency of your home, of any building you work in, you worship in, you live in. And the bar at the bottom it's a gradient of some simple low-cost measures that you can take on the green side to more complex projects that are going to more like that hotter end of this scale. So on the lower cost, no cost projects like turning off the lights when you walk out of a room, you can just put up a sign, in your in the rooms of your buildings, or you could have automated, timers that go on and off, or installing smart thermostats, right? These may cost, a couple $100s to install, or just be a change in behavior. And the lower the cost of that investment, the shorter amount of time it's going to take for you to recoup that initial investment. But because it's an energy efficiency measure, you're going to continue to receive the benefits of lowering your costs because you're using less energy. Now, as you take care of those lower cost items, you might want to think, well, what are some bigger projects that I can do that might require some fundraising, capital investment planning to invest in projects of installing a heat pump, putting solar on your rooftop or in your parking lot, or insulating, your attic, putting in new windows. These are more complex projects that are going to take a longer term, maybe 10, 20 years on that investment, but your building is going to be around for 30, 50, even longer years. So many times that investment is going to be worth its cost because of the continued energy savings you're going to have in the lifetime of you using that building. With the climate plans that Allison had introduced in her presentation, there were programs that our office put forward to help the community adapt or adopt some of these practices. And we realize that there may be a financial barrier to adopting some of these practices. And so in 2023, we expanded the Energy Conservation Assistance Program that we work in cooperation with the Northern Virginia Soil Water Conservation District to administer our program. And the Energy Conservation Assistance Program, it's a cost share reimbursement grant program. And what that means is that an applicant will provide part of the funding for the project, and then upon completion, you get reimbursed for the cost of the project. So let me just go through part of some of the program criteria. First are eligible organizations. We really appreciate the opportunity of being invited by Suzette to speak to you all today, because places of worship are an eligible organization for this program. Others, if you live in a homeowners association or condominium association, you are also eligible for this program. If you work for a nonprofit organization, that would be another eligible organization. Now, even though you're an eligible organization, you also have to meet certain criteria in order to be approved for this program. that you have to demonstrate that you are able to make improvements to that property, whether you own it or it's through program management, and that you're able to commit to the cost share of the project itself. So through the application process, you'll say, I want to do a project that's going to be $5,000. You're going to, through a set of documentation, inform myself that you do have the funds for this project, because you're going to have to pay that contractor, at the end of the project, and then you'll get reimbursed. And what the cost share requirements are for many places of worship or eligible organization, that cost share is going to be 50% of the cost of that project, up to a threshold of $5,000 or $10,000. Or if you're located in a more vulnerable area in the community, then your cost share is only going to be set 25%. If you are eligible for a 50 or 25%, the county's reimbursement share is going to be 50% or 75%. And you can see how the math, everything will equal up to 100% of the total cost of the project. What I can't emphasize enough is that before you enter into a contract with your contractor or your energy professional, or you have purchased any supplies, started anything about the project that would make you ineligible for this project, you are required to seek pre-approval through our program manager before the project is started. The types of projects are quite wide-ranging. It goes across that spectrum of low to no cost to more complex projects. But I'd like to just start off with that in addition to those projects, you can also submit to be reimbursed for an energy audit. We highly recommend doing an energy audit. It costs about 20 to 30 cents per square foot in order for a level 2 energy audit to be completed by an energy certified professional. And that really gives you a roadmap to tell you where are your energy savings and projects in your building? What's your return on investment? So it really helps you to prioritize and gives you a starting point for what energy improvements to make in your building. And we will reimburse you up to $5,000 for that energy audit. And like I said, they're coming in around 20 to 30 cents per square foot. Then once you do that energy audit, and an energy audit is not required to apply for the Energy Conservation Assistance Program. If you already have a project in mind, you can submit one for an energy efficiency project or a renewable energy project or a resilience project. And let me just give you a few examples of what each one of those are going to be. So energy efficiency projects are your LED lighting, your heating and cooling assistance, windows, things that improve the energy efficiency of your building. A renewable energy project would be solar, geothermal, so you're adding renewable energy to the grid. A resilience project, now while there is the flood mitigation fund that Allison referred to in the project to deal with the wet type of projects, the resilience projects that would be eligible through this program would be things like battery storage or a cool roof. Okay, it's finding my next slide. Just wrapping up here. So since this program has been in operation since 2016, the county has supported 27 projects in total, 5 energy audits, 20 energy efficiency, and 2 renewable solar projects. This has resulted in an impressive $870,000 investment in energy projects by the community. And we're really happy to have played a part in helping to either motivate or provide that financing that really made those projects possible. For example, an energy efficiency project, one of the more popular projects we've had from places of worship have been in replacing their lighting with more energy efficient LED lighting. These projects have cost places of worship anywhere from $900 to $6,000, resulting in a 75% energy savings in their utility bills. As soon as you screw in that light bulb, you are gaining those savings. And that has a return on investment in terms of recouping the cost of those projects in about 3 to 5 years. So how do I apply? This is a QR code, and I'll be providing these slides so that you can have these for reference later on. We wanted to make the application simple enough, but provide us with enough information to determine the eligibility for the project, and that is actually going to save you energy and money in the long term. So we're asking information about your place of worship, contact information, describing your energy project, quantifying what those energy costs and savings are going to be for you, as well as supporting documentation showing us that you can make those changes to your property, as well as the cost for the project itself. And we do recommend, for just consumer protection, getting at least 2 quotes so that you know that you are getting a good value for the project itself. And I believe I'm coming up on my last couple of slides. The application process is pretty streamlined. Once you submit your application, you should expect a notice of approval or requesting additional information in 5 to 10 business days, or 1 to 2 weeks. Once you receive that approval, we ask that you sign a participation agreement that you will be providing us with information for the project, allowing us to use pictures from the project to help promote the program as well. And then once your project is complete, there is an online application submittal form to submit your invoices, and then your reimbursement again would be reviewed and approved and submitted for reimbursement in 5 to 10 business days once again, and then issued by the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District within 45 days. I'm having problems. There we go. All right, so just some important details. There is no hard deadline for this program. It's a first come, first served basis, where each year we ask the Board of Supervisors to fund this program. Currently, we have sufficient funds to continue to support additional projects through the end of June of this year. But the sooner you get in a project, the sooner you have certainty that those funds will be available to support your project. Applications are funded based on available funding. So once that funding runs out this fiscal year, we would have to wait until July 1 of the next fiscal year to support your project. 1 application per organization is accepted each year, with the exception that if you do an energy audit in that first year, you may submit an application for a project recommendation from that audit. And that is a once-time occurrence for that particular scenario. And then once again, I just want to mention that pre-approval is required before any project should be started to ensure and maintain your eligibility. Anyway, so you can scan this QR code for program information, and as well as the online application form. So I hope this provided you with some additional information and a new resource that you have in the county to support the good work that you are doing in your faith communities. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, Neely. We have a couple minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for Allison or Neely about their presentation? Well, if you have questions after, this ends and you go back and talk to the people at your congregation or your house of worship, feel free to reach out to them. Neely, will you also be providing your, there you go, your email? Will you also be providing the slides for the presentation?
Absolutely.
So I will send out the oh goodness, it's getting late. My brain is not working. The evaluation, sorry, I will send out the evaluation, I will send out the slides. I will send out the recording to the meeting in a couple of days. I have to wait for our communications team to upload the recording, and then you will get all of that. I do want to let you all know that this is our last Zoom meeting. Future meetings will be held on Teams, as the county is no longer providing us Zoom. So I know sometimes people have difficulty with Teams. So if you don't have the app or need to install it, I suggest you do it now, because if you participate in any other county meetings after the December 31st, they will all be on Teams. Does anyone have any last minute comments? I do want to thank you all for attending. Thank you all for staying until the end. I want to say a special thank you to Neely and Allison. This was great information. And if you all could just hold on afterwards. Michelle is giving us a hand, and Michelle Guthrie is here also. She's with Land Development Services, so some of you may know her from other projects.
I'm the nonprofit and religious